Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
You know, we've talked a lot recently about timing and people complaining about how far apart the two cities are in the Stanley Cup Final. And I think we all stand by what we said, which is like, if you're complaining about the distance between the two and the flights back and forth, like, it's the NHL. It's spread across North America, top to bottom, left to right. Like, it's going to happen. The complaints that are warranted, though, is how tight the NHL schedule has left things. We are, in this episode, talking about the 2024 NHL Draft, our official preview episode, which is one of our biggest episodes every year, which takes a ton of prep, and we need a ton of airtime to do it all. We also have a press conference that came pre-draft and pre-free agency and everything from Steve Yzerman. We also now have trade rumors and news that are actually substantial that we have to talk about, which is exciting. All this happening is good. I am not of the mind that, you know, the NHL, some people in the NHL actually think the same way, that things have to happen in a certain order and you don't want things to interrupt each other. No, forget that. It's good to have a lot of attention and chaos. But this isn't, you know, random happenstance. This is the NHL schedule just making everything insane. So this is here's what the Winged Wheel Podcast is going to be for the next couple of weeks. And that's not including any news that warrants an emergency episode. This is your 2024 NHL Draft Preview episode, our official preview. The draft itself, the Red Wings perspective, things like that. Wednesday is going to be our final mock draft. In those two episodes are also going to be all the trade rumors, all the free agency rumors, which, again, there are quite a few of if you get into Patrick Kane and News on Sider and Raymond and Linus Ullmark and all of that. And then after the draft is going to be the draft recap episode. And then not too long after that is going to be our first free agency review, maybe free agent frenzy, maybe free agent fizzle, whatever it is, episode. And then beyond that, it's going to be whatever other chaos happens. Somewhere in there, we're going to have to talk about the biggest game in modern NHL history, which isn't going to be in the A block or B block of this episode. So I say all this with a tone of we're mad. We're not. It's actually a lot of fun, but it's like, where do we put it all?
You could be mad about the fact the NHL still playing on June 23rd.
Yes.
I think that's the ultimate complaint in there, whether you realize it or not. But yes, that is something worth being mad about. The rest is, oh, so fun. Oh, so much fun.
If you want to know our opinion, last episode we said, cut the preseason way down, start the season in September.
A month earlier.
And they'll never cut games, even though I think that's the dream for a lot of people. They'll never cut games, and just find a way, do whatever you have to do for scheduling to make sure that award the cup as soon as possible. As soon as possible. Before June, as early into May as you can, and then give yourself time. We make the same joke. What's everyone wanting to do in the NHL, players, execs, etc.? They want to go up to their cottages.
Imagine if this was, and this is, I don't mean to take a shot at either of these teams, but imagine if it was Seattle and Carolina in the finals right now, and we're still playing hockey into end of June. I think the ratings would be horrific.
I think Seattle would get good ratings, but I know what you mean. Like, what if it was just like a completely tiny market?
Yeah.
It helps them that this is the biggest game in modern NHL history, though.
Yeah, we were talking about it pre-episode that the most recent game that probably comes near the gravity of this one would be 2011 Bruins Canucks, just because it was big U.S. market, big Canadian market. The series was chaotic. But neither of those teams came back from a 3-0 deficit to get us to that Game 7.
No, the biggest news in that series was when they burned the city down after in Vancouver. Anyhow, we'll start with the NHL draft, but not to worry. All of what we talked about is coming. Arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times. I have a feeling that the schedule is going to be thrown out early on this one. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, folks. Here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, which is a big statement right now, the NHL draft, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to start with our full 2024 NHL draft preview episode, what picks Detroit has, overall general rankings. We're going to talk about the players who, in all likelihood, could be Red Wings picks. We'll talk about different scenarios, our preferences, our predictions. One of us seems to get something right every year, so we'll see which one of us takes the Lobstradamus crown this time. Opportunities for trade. What are the most, wild things that could potentially happen in the realm of possibility with Steve Yzerman and his crew in this NHL draft, second round and beyond, and lots more. We're going to be talking about specific Detroit Red Wings news. Steve Yzerman did his press conference where he talked about Seider and Raymond, some news on Larkin. There's some news going around on Patrick Kane, noise around yet another goalie in Linus Ullmark, all of that and lots more. And then we are going to be talking about the Stanley Cup Final, which has gone to a historic Game 7. And goodness knows what else before overtime. Before that, I want to let you know that the Winged Wheel Podcast is proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. You get access to some really great benefits like our Patreon exclusive bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. They're a lot of fun. You not only get, all the other questions that didn't make the main show answered. We let loose, have fun, talk about hockey, not hockey. We include bloopers, pre-recording, segments in there. It's a good time. So you get that. You get the Patreon exclusive Discord, which is a fantastic community, and you're also automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. The 2024 draft. Macklin Celebrini is the face of it, and yet you rarely hear his name because all of the excitement is going to happen after that. Not exactly new in terms of what happens after the first overall pick, but this year seems to be chock full of what ifs, where's he going to go, potential chaos, and more.
Yeah, I think this draft, when you look at the top, I'll say 8 picks, you can make a reasonable guess as to what position each of those teams will pick just based on their farm system's needs, their prospect pipeline's needs. Except for one, and they pick at 2. I think Anaheim clearly needs defense. Columbus clearly needs a center. Montreal clearly needs a forward. And you can keep going through all of them, and we will. But Chicago needs everything, and what they do at 2 sets up the rest of the draft. So it's almost impossible to get a gauge on what's going to happen because the most pivotal pick happens so early.
Which is fun, which is a lot of fun. And then you get into the whole, someone's trying to poison the well with news on Demidov and trying to get him to fall down the order. And he shows up to North America and he's taller and bigger than everyone knows him to be. And he's talking about, there's not going to be a risk of him staying over there forever. And he will make it over on the timeline that people anticipate in a year. Like, it's with all the deception and tomfoolery and pulling the wool over people's eyes that already happens in the NHL draft, it's good that the chaos could start as early as 2.
Yeah, it was fun. Demidov showing up to that combine in Florida, not skating with fresh surgical scars on his shins, and he's 2 inches taller.
Brad furiously trying to find Demidov's phone number.
He's got that Florida insert money.
Take your pick. Okay, let's start with Macklin Celebrini and move down the order from there. General overview of the player and what San Jose is going to get in Macklin Celebrini.
Everything. That's the whole appeal of Macklin Celebrini. He's the first overall pick that doesn't have that one, oh my God, elite trait. He doesn't have Connor Bedard's shot. He doesn't have Connor McDavid's skating. But what he does have is an above average shot, above average skating, above average hands, above average hockey sense, above average compete. He checks every box that you would want in a number 1 center. And it's not like when I say these are above average traits, like they're just above. They're borderline elite. He's not going to be the best in the NHL at any of these traits, probably not even top 10, but he's not going to be far off on a few of them. And when you combine the total package that he is with the high hockey IQ that he has, he's a special, special player. There's a reason San Jose's first overall pick is so boring, is because nobody has come close to challenging him for first overall this year.
If you're San Jose, do you want him in the organization as soon as possible?
Absolutely. He just won the Hobie at 17 years old.
He was the youngest player in college hockey as well.
And he won the Hobie, and we can already sit here and say, what else does he have to prove there?
The debate has been had elsewhere, and the only thing is, what can San Jose do around him? Because the NHL is not a friendly league if you're a star and you don't have support around you, right?
The question I have around Celebrini is he the best player on the San Jose Sharks as of June 28th?
Will Smith would be the only one to potentially
And I don't think
challenge it.
I don't think Smith is better.
Could be.
And I'm trying to think of all the veterans on the Sharks, and one, it made me realize, oh my God, they are bad. And two, yeah, they need Celebrini. Now, we've talked for 8 years in a Red Wings rebuild. You always do what's best for the player's development, not what's best for the team in circumstances like this. But I think it's both one and the same. He's got nothing left to prove in the NCAA, and the Sharks clearly need him in their lineup to just save them from being a borderline laughingstock again.
Artyom Levshunov, Michigan State, incredible personality in front of the cameras, really has impressed people. I mean, not just recently, for how long now? All year people have been talking about him. And that is, a lot of people in their mind, they think that's where Chicago is going to go with this. As you mentioned, Brad, it could go a different ways, but who's Levshunov as a defenseman?
Big, fun, calm. He's all over the ice in a controlled way. I don't want that to sound like he's reckless, but he's good in transition, can break out, good first pass, loves to activate in the offensive zone, solid defense, physical. His defense isn't super refined, though. That's the knock on him. He's got work to do. Still creates some turnovers, still misses some assignments, but like he was playing in the NCAA as well, so it's not like he was messing up this against juniors for his size. And yeah, there's enough offense there to really excite you. He's the type of guy that if he hits, he's playing on your first pairing and you're putting him on the ice in every situation.
And for the record, we're going to be talking about, we'll mention when players start to get into reasonably, these could be Red Wings picks. I mean, anybody could be a Red Wings pick if Detroit makes a massive trade. I think the only one that you would say is nigh on and impossible is Celebrini, obviously. But assuming Detroit stays at 15th overall, we'll start to tell you when these guys could potentially fall. Ivan Demidov, who some people have at second and some people have falling out of the top 10, depending on their fears of him, what's the Russian factor going to do and where's he going to fit in?
Arguably the most skilled player in the draft. He might not have Celebrini's well-rounded game, and he may not have the insanely high hockey IQ that Celebrini does. Not that his is bad. It's still well above average, but what he can do with the puck, what he can do in the offensive zone, what he can do off the rush, it's incredible. The only question around him as an offensive driver is he hasn't done it at the pro level yet. He got buried in the MHL for another year, which, by the way, he won back-to-back MVPs in and playoff MVP. He's toying with kids his own age at that level. And I don't know if it's comparable to the CHL. I don't think it is, but it's at least close enough that you can reasonably compare them. And if he was in the OHL this year, he's 120, 130 points. Like, for context, it's unbelievable what this guy can do with the puck.
Cayden Lindstrom. We talked about him and his profile and how he's a big question mark because of the injury concerns and how much of that is going to linger. The kinds of injuries and work he's done, it could represent something that can nag him for his career. But if this is something that he gets through as he grows and develops, then you have a potential, star centerman on your hands. So who's Cayden Lindstrom? What do you guys think about him?
Top 6 center, 6'4", with high skill level. The back injury scares people. There's questions around his hockey IQ. But man, that is a rare combination. His talent combined with his size and his willingness to use it. Again, it needs to be worth repeating. A back injury scares you every time at this age, but he's an elite athlete. This is a guy that you're betting on the traits and that it all comes together at the NHL level.
He looks like a grown man.
Yeah.
At the combine, he looked like a grown man. And so that will translate big time up levels into the NHL.
GMs love that too.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's not even a joke either for a guy to come in and be able to physically, I don't want to say dominate, but get past the issues that younger players struggle with when they're developing still. Their bodies are still filling out in their frames. Like a dramatic example is Trevor Zegras. He's a pretty slight guy, and he gets pushed around and loses board battles at times, and the Ducks hate that. And so for a guy to come in and be young but not have to worry about getting, thrown around, that's going to go a long way. Anton Silayev is a player. He actually has a pretty wide range of potential. I've seen a lot of mocks of him going a lot lower, but we talked in our previous conversations about him. He could also go pretty high. So who's Silayev as a defenseman?
He's 6'7", which means he immediately grabs attention of every NHL team. Had a great first year in the KHL, which not a lot of 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds can crack the KHL, let alone play a prominent role there and do well in it. He's a good skater for his size, reasonably skilled with a puck, good first pass. I like that you mentioned a range of outcomes because he could be everything from Zdeno Chara to Tyler Myers. And, you can argue where Tyler Myers should go in a redraft, but teams still value Tyler Myers. And if this guy can continue to develop the way he has been, get some hands, get some playmaking involved, oh man, you could have a special player here. But again, he doesn't have all the traits yet to go with that 6'7" frame. So yeah, the range of outcomes on him is substantial.
I like Silayev as a high-end pick. I think there's other guys who would do it for me in a much more definitive way. But like you said, Brad, if those tools come together, and if your amateur scouting team looks at him and your development staff look at him and say, yeah, we actually think he has the tools to be this unicorn, this exceptional player. You're not saying, oh, I think he could be a top 4 defenseman. You're saying, I think he could be a guy who people remember his name for decades like they do with Zdeno Chara. That's a fun project. It's a far thing from a certainty, but I think that's what makes Silayev fascinating. I don't think it's unfair when people rank him lower for the reasons you stated, Brad, but it's even the possibility that you can turn into that. Sometimes if the board falls right for you and you have other needs filled on your team, that could be a very worthwhile pick. Zeev Buium. And I know I'm going in kind of a wacky order here, but I know, Brad, you're very, very fond of Zeev Buium. So who is he and what could they get out of, brother of Shai Buium, Red Wings draft pick, and another Denver massively successful champion over there. Zeev could potentially be one of the best, if not the best defenseman in this draft.
Yeah, what can't he do is kind of my question with him. He had 50 points in the NCAA this year. And you see that time to time in juniors, especially, where a guy will just put up gaudy numbers as a forward or a defenseman, and it's because he's playing 30 minutes a game on a bad team, and they just have to force feed him the puck. He played for the national champions, a team that, oh, by the way, their specialty was suffocating the offense of the other team, and he was the leader of that. So elite brain, okay skating, okay size, great hands, great skill. And, he can defend now, too, by the way. Again, spoiler for when we talk about my ranking, he's my top-rated defenseman. He's unbelievable. He put up 50 points as a defenseman, draft-eligible defenseman in the NCAA on the national champions. I can't quantify how bonkers that is.
Some team is going to get such I don't want to say guaranteed a special player, but he is probably not talked about enough in terms of his ability to ascend to the special level of player that comes out of some drafts where you look back and you're like, oh, that guy who's taken 5th, 6th, 4th is potentially actually the best player in the draft, the second best player in the draft.
Yeah, and you try to make comps as best you can for previous players who, were drafted out of the same, league area, position, yada, yada, yada. 2 recent draft picks of defensemen in the NCAA who did not produce at the rate Zeev Buium did in the NCAA, Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes. And I think Buium has a very high floor. This isn't a boom or bust. This isn't, we're going to talk about him soon, Zayne Parekh, where the range of outcomes is massive. Buium, to me, his floor is very high, and his ceiling is insanely high. This guy should be a no-doubt top 5 all day, every day to me, but yet I keep seeing him 6, 7, 8, 9 in a lot of mocks, and I understand it. It's a strong top 10, but that just seems crazy to me for what his resume is.
This isn't even good analysis, but something that I genuinely believe has gone on in the amateur scouting and mock draft world is I think people have been mixing up Zeev, Buium, and Zayne Parekh just because of the letter Z to start their names. And I think they've been conflating the two because of how, I mean, they're different players and different defenders. And I think a lot of people maybe translate Parekh's deficiencies onto Buium.
Yeah, because they are not the same player at all.
So who is Zayne Parekh then?
Zayne Parekh is the, oh my God, buckle up, because you could have Erik Karlsson or you could have a guy who spends his career in the AHL. His pure offensive talent and creativity with the puck in the offensive zone is ahead of everybody in this draft. Full stop. You could maybe even make the same argument for forwards and lump him in there. The vision, the creativity, the hands, the shot. It's one of those types of players where once he crosses that offensive blue line, everything's possible. But with those types of players, everything's possible doesn't always mean only good things. Because in the D zone, everything's possible. He might make a great stop. He might absolutely blow coverage and give the other team an easy goal. He might just fall over while battling for a puck in the corner. All things are possible with Zayne Parekh. So I always like betting on upside, but this is the boom or bust prospect of this draft, even more so than Cole Eiserman.
You talk about betting on upside, and the word betting actually has a big implication in the other direction. And yeah, the bet is he's either Erik Karlsson or he's Erik Karlsson. We've seen both sides of that. The part to me, I hate player comps. I hate having to do it because I think it just creates too rigid of a perceived path for people when they analyze a player's development. And it's kind of like a best case scenario because you're only giving player comps to NHLers who are inherently successful because they're still NHLers and you know their name. But one that I really liked was John Klingberg. I thought that was from Corey Pronman. I thought that was, and it's never going to be a perfect one-to-one. I actually think Parekh in a perfect world could have higher offensive upside than Klingberg.
I think he definitely has higher upside, yes.
But the overall, that guy's an offensive weapon and he is not going to make you happy defensively game in and game out. That's kind of what it says to you. And that's not to say Parekh couldn't improve defensively.
And the one thing I should mention is Parekh does have a lot of compete and intensity in his game. He's not this like play the game in a rocking chair and whatever happens type of offensive defenseman. Let's just try some stuff. And if it doesn't work, oh, well, no, the guy's a competitor. Like, I'm not ruling out that he won't get into a really good development program and they beat defense into him and he absorbs it every step of the way.
Okay. I'm going to talk about this guy because I think he's likelier to go higher, but Carter Yakemchuk. And, we're talking about a lot of defensemen here and this might be how the draft goes because of the defense needy teams in and around there. But Carter Yakemchuk, again, wide range on where he might go. But I think in my mind kind of fits the profile for what a lot of defense need teams would love to see in a defenseman.
He might be the poster child in the future for how a draft combine can affect a player. He tested very poorly. Apparently the interviews didn't go like super great. He wasn't blowing teams away. Didn't look or feel like a natural athlete at all. But he's 6'3", shoots right, and put up over 30 goals in the WHL. Like the guy knows hockey. What's the old saying? Puck don't lie. Mm-hmm. The guy's impressive on the ice. Yeah, you can see the lack of natural athletic ability. Some things about the way he does it on ice looks clunky, looks wonky, looks uncomfortable. But I can say the same things about Dougie Hamilton, who plays a very similar style, right? So I'm not fully going to ding Yakemchuk for that, but it is something to make note of. But again, you get a 6'3" right-handed defenseman. Again, high compete level. This is a guy who cares on the ice, brings a lot of intensity, defends okay. Like you see 30 goals and you assume like Parekh, just a defensive black hole. Not really the case with Yakemchuk. There are a lot of warts there, though. He's no surefire gonna thrive in the D zone in the NHL, but that amount of offense it's hard to ignore.
I know the combine may have moved things down. I still get the sense that, you're right, Brad, you can't ignore what he did. It might make some decisions for teams who have options at a few different defensemen. But if you start to get out of the range where you have, multiple defensemen to pick from, Buium, Parekh, Dickinson, Silayev, Yakemchuk, etc., and you have just Yakemchuk maybe, and you're a defense needy team, I can see them looking past he didn't test well or he didn't interview well, because puck don't lie could be the explanation, or it could be puck might lie, but I really need a big right-handed defenseman who can do things offensively too, because it's a tough position to fill. It's a very tough position to fill. All right, I don't think this player is likely to be a Red Wing, barring a trade, but I think this is the first where you can say there is an outside shot that maybe some things can happen and things can move around and Detroit could grab him. And we're talking very, 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 very small chances. But Iginla is a very fascinating prospect, and I know a lot of people have him pegged to go to Calgary. He might even go earlier than that.
Not the biggest guy in the world. I think he's still listed at sub 6 feet. He can score, he can rip a puck, and he's got a high-end skill set. Like, this is the type of player who loves to turn defenders inside out in one-on-one situations. And no surprises, son of Jarome Iginla, battles his ass off, competes his ass off. The phrase I keep hearing around him, a lot of pro-like qualities, a lot of pro-like attention to detail in the way he backchecks, forechecks, engages in puck battles, finds the right spots on the ice to be in at the right times. He's shot up a lot of rankings because you find that offensive touch with those details. Teams are going to be all over it. Yeah, I think Calgary's biggest concern is he doesn't make it to 9.
If his last name wasn't Iginla, I would be like, this is the type of guy the Red Wings should definitely try and get, because he fills such a great need for him. Well, unfortunately, I think Calgary really, really wants this player and is trying to do everything in their political power to secure him at their position. But yeah, he's been one of the highest risers year over year into this draft. He'd be a perfect Red Wing, but I don't think he's going to be there, unfortunately.
I fully agree with you, Evan. I think the name Iginla is worth 6 picks here.
Yeah.
I don't think he's that far off a potential 15th overall talent. I do think his late rising is justified. I know there's a lot of criticism of, it's just the name, or the pro qualities are because, his dad is coaching him and helping him develop. And that's
How's
fair,
that a bad thing?
But it's not a bad thing, right? Like, knowing that a kid knows what it takes, that is half the battle, and sometimes more for a lot of players. How many times have we talked about extremely talented players who could do so much more in the NHL, but it is not easy to jump into the pro game mentally. It's not easy to do the work you need to do off the ice physically. It's a huge shift. And remember, like, hockey players, that's not a dressing room full of saints. It's young, talented, cocky, and for good reason, kids who at some point, if they're successful enough coming up the ranks where all they've really had to focus on is hockey in the modern day, they get a ton of money thrown at them. That is like a perfect recipe for spoiling a person and making them tough to work with. So scouting teams really, really, really focus on who is this kid off the ice and can he fit in the room and can he be like a consummate pro? And so, yeah, Iginla has those advantages because of his dad, who's one of the most beloved players of his generation. And that's a bonus for him. So if a team reaches for Iginla, let's say they take him at 6, whatever, that's fair to me. I think that's not absolutely wild.
I think that's well in the range for him. This draft, as we've talked about, there's a lot of guys who could go as high as 5. I think the top 4, you can probably make a reasonably educated guess as to who the 4 are. And if one of those 4 doesn't go, they're probably not making it past 5 or 6. But
you're talking Celebrini, Levshunov, Lindstrom, Demidov?
Yeah, and you could probably throw Silayev in there as well as the likely top 5. It wouldn't be crazy if someone snuck in there, but if one of them gets out of the top 5, they're not lasting very long. But in that 5-6 range, that's when you get into the range of Hage, Buium, Sennecke. A lot of guys could go there. And if a team, like, we know how the draft goes. It's why Cam Fowler fell to 12. Like, he was just number 2 on everybody's list when they were making the pick. That could happen here. Just takes one team. Utah loves Iginla. Yeah. Gone at 6. Like, that's the nature of the draft.
How many jerseys would you sell as a brand new hockey team with Iginla on the back?
How many jerseys do you sell with the name Iginla, number of whatever he picks in Calgary?
Okay, you talked about players who could go higher up and break that top 5. Perfect segue. Berkly Catton, because we've talked a lot about on talent. He might be the most underappreciated player at the top end of this draft.
On talent, he's a top 5 player all day. All day. The thing with Catton is try to pick apart his game. Ultra competitive, great character, apparently crushed his interviews with teams. Teams love him. He scores goals, over 50 goals in the WHL as a draft eligible. Over 100 points in the WHL as a draft eligible. He can be your playmaker. He can be your trigger man. He's got excellent detail. He's got excellent positioning on the ice. He's the guy that you throw on the ice in any situation. Last minute of the game, power play, penalty kill. You need a goal with 30 seconds left. You throw him on the ice, and his skill level is so high. There is a high degree of confidence that it's going to translate. So why is he not a surefire top 5? Well, he's 5'10". And as much as we've sat here and seen guys like this succeed over and over and over and over again, the guys who have that compete hockey IQ and high skill level, size doesn't matter. There's dozens of examples in the NHL that, like, look at Zach Benson, 13th overall, made the NHL year 1. Did not have to go back to junior. But we've seen it. Teams make this mistake every year, and lots of them. They will not draft a small player.
He would certainly be a great complementary centerman for the Red Wings if they're going to be relying on Danielson and Marco Kasper as their sort of two-way centerman going forward, because Berkly Catton doesn't play amazing defense, but man, is he good in transition, and he's good off the rush, and he can shoot the puck in any which way. He would be the ultimate piece to add to that center depth for the Red Wings.
There's a lot of players who I think would fit this bill, and I've talked about this a lot, which is I would trade up for them if I'm Detroit, because, again, I sound like a broken record. Detroit has a ton of prospect stock. Detroit still has draft stock, and Detroit has a want and a need to get better sooner rather than later because we've been in this rebuild for how long. Berkly Catton is probably at the top of my list, barring like Demidov falling forever down the board of you move up to grab that guy. Teej as well. I really like Teej, but Berkly Catton for me just because of the position.
We know Teej isn't getting past 9, and number 10 is where I probably think the cost to trade up is at least stomachable. And if Catton gets to New Jersey at 10, I'm calling New Jersey, I'm calling Buffalo, I'm calling Philly, I'm calling Minnesota till someone says yes.
And New Jersey and Buffalo have been pretty open about being open to trading their picks. It's tough with New Jersey in conference, and they're probably going to be the team that's going to give you the most trouble if you're Detroit wanting to be another wild card team, because they're likely going to be in the race next year, especially now that they, in their minds, have solved goaltending. And Buffalo is even harder because that's in division, and they weren't a threat to Detroit this year. And can you count on that again? But still, if 10 or 11 are available, it's a good window in.
They're also the two teams where you might want to get strategic about this, because if there's any teams that are overloaded on small, skilled forwards right now, it's probably New Jersey and Buffalo. So if Catton's there, there's no guarantee they pick him. Maybe you start at Philly and go, okay, let's take an educated guess here and assume he'll get past them if he gets that far, and see what the cost would be. And then the trade's already worked out if he does end up getting to that pick.
High-end offensive talent. Again, it's going to be kind of tough because Detroit has the 15th overall pick, and we're talking about guys who are likely going around the 10 range here, but Beckett, Sennecke is another one where you would be very, very happy in my mind if he falls to Detroit's pick. So who is he as a prospect?
Well, the rumors around him are he might not get past 7.
Mm-hmm.
That might be his new range with how rapid his ascension has been since the OHL playoffs started. But he's 6'2", 6'3", I think is what he measured in at the combine. But you know how like it's almost hard to describe certain things without just going off like vibes or bro phrases? His skill is just sick.
Yeah.
Some of the things he does with the puck, very, very Tage Thompson-esque, where he just sees stuff that just isn't there. And even at his height and reach, he can just do things with it that are insane. He loves to attack the middle of the ice. He gets there in creative ways. And whether it's an assist or a goal, he just does some sick stuff out there.
I find that a lot of the criticism of him are based on that kind of skill, because he's he really tries to drive a game and make big moments because of that. And that I would rather have that problem. It's you'd rather try to tame a tiger rather than paint stripes on a cat kind of thing. Like if you get him to read plays better, make better decisions on when to try to go one-on-one solo versus utilize your teammates, you have the skill to do both. That's the kind of thing where you can't teach it, or it's very, very hard to teach it. So it makes it really attractive prospect. And it's also why I ultimately agree with you, Brad. I think teams are going to be perfectly okay with that as a downfall. It's not his only drawback, mind you, but I know that's a big one where people are like, he would try too much and he would turn the puck over. But that's part of developing as a player.
He's another guy who's had a meteoric rise. I think the first half of the year really didn't get it figured out, and then he was well over a point per game in the 2024 calendar year. So another guy who's kind of started to figure it out and looks like he has a lot of skill that would translate up easily into the NHL.
Star of the London Knights program, Sam Dickinson, another defenseman who, again, I actually think he can go in that big run of defensemen earlier. He kind of fits the mold of pro-style defenseman that a lot of teams might like. Some people higher on him, some people lower on him, but where's Sam Dickinson in your mind?
He's fascinating because he really elevated in the Memorial Cup offensively, and everybody knew when you say 200-foot defenseman that there's a good offensive element there, and he really did do well with that, especially on a loaded London team where he did not get any power play one time. He's a great skater. He's big, mobile. There's just a lot of refining that needs to be done to his game. His defensive coverage is okay. Like, I wouldn't call it a weakness, but I wouldn't call it a strength. There are times he bobbles the puck or forces passes that just aren't there, that creates turnovers. Again, it comes back to that thing of, rather tame a tiger. And I think at the NHL level, you could round him out to be a really well, jack of all trades defenseman who can do whatever you need him to do, a la Noah Hannafin. I just don't see any elite traits there. I don't see him turning into like a superstar, but I mean, you get a top 4 all situations defenseman in the top 10 of a draft, you're happy.
Sam Dickinson's, let's say his high end of his outcomes is first pair lefty, right? Maybe not superstar, but on a lot of teams they're first pair lefty.
Yeah, he's
because I imagine him plugged next to Seider. I know it's ignoring Edvinsson, but that's pretty nice to think about.
A cheaper, better skating Darnell Nurse might be the comp there.
Hopefully cheaper.
Much cheaper.
Although,
take away the memes from Darnell Nurse, and it seems like a far more positive comparison, but that's kind of what you're looking at here.
Okay, so I think in my mind, that ends the list of players who are really likely to not be in Detroit's range. Again, things can change, and Detroit can move up, and we talked about the players we would like to see Detroit move up to, and we kind of spoiled a little bit of the what are the trade opportunities content with the picks 10 and 11 being open and other things. But I think the first player in my mind that is at all likely to be in Detroit's range is this next one, Konsta Helenius. We talked about recently on the podcast, so a quick recap on him and what that would mean for Detroit at 15th overall.
I recently heard, since that last episode, a Marco Rossi comp, and I really like that. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's got the natural hands that Rossi does, but that kind of 200-foot center, enough offense to keep you intrigued. He's not big, so the defensive questions will be there when he gets to the NHL level. Can you defend as a sub-6-foot centerman without elite speed? I could see a path where he is that guy. And yeah, he's so smart on the ice. You can't discount that.
His intelligence to me is, the more I watch, the more I think it's actually that of a player who's really should be going a lot higher. If he had that intelligence and was 3 inches taller, and I know, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bike kind of thing, but he would be plugged into the top 10, if not higher, every day of the week. But I really think his hockey IQ is a recipe for a really great NHLer. And it's not a surefire thing. Brad touched on some of the points that has people with a little bit of reservations, and the size is also a thing you have to consider. It's never an advantage to be small in the NHL. It certainly doesn't disqualify you, but I see him as a highly, highly intelligent player who can do a lot, despite some quirks and qualms at different points during his seasons.
Yeah, I'm certainly not as high as I think a lot of people are on Konsta Helenius, but he's a detail-oriented center. He's incredibly smart. He understands the game. So those types of things will carve out a long, long NHL career. So whoever ends up picking him, they're going to get a player that they're going to squeeze a lot of juice out of, and they'll be very happy with that pick.
Cole Eiserman. Polarizing. I think you have to look at Trevor Connelly to find a player who's more polarizing. But in terms of on-ice play, Cole Eiserman is, you either love him or you think it's not worth the flyer. Where are you at on Cole Eiserman now?
I like him. I think this might be one of those cases where he's been a little over-scouted, if that makes sense, because he came into the season with such a high-end reputation, and he didn't fully live up to that this year, even though he was over a goal per game. You know, I think he ended up breaking Cole Caulfield's goal record. And he's not your prototypical goal scorer with questions because he competes well. He gets to the middle of the ice. He engages physically. Like, he's not shy from that area of the game. He's not, great at it, but he's not scared of it. He doesn't back away from it. So the foundation of, want and compete is there. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't have consistency issues because that's a huge knock against him, but I don't think that's he just mentally checks out of games issue for him. I don't know what causes it, but it's there. It's a thing. But what's the hardest thing to do in the NHL? Score a goal. He is better at that than everybody in this draft. And, we talk about the shot just being elite, and it is. But again, one thing I heard someone way smarter than me talking about recently with Eiserman is it's not just that he has a bomb of a shot. It's that he can get it off quickly and from weird angles. The NHL is a lateral game to beat goalies. There's very few players who can just walk down the wing, get to the top of a circle, and beat a goalie. He has that in his repertoire, but as goalies evolve, they stop those way more often than they don't, no matter how good of a shooter you are. But when that puck's coming laterally and you got to get it off quick, or you got to get it off at an awkward angle or from, an awkward position, he can do it, and he can do it well. So is he going to be the guy you throw in all situations? No. But you post him up on the right half wall on a power play, and he could be lethal, among the best in the league from that spot. And you can nitpick the rest of his game all you want. Someone like that is still very, very valuable in a special teams-driven league.
I feel like where I comment on Cole Eiserman might actually be a little bit out of the norm because I'm middling on him. Because I agree with what you said, Brad. You can't deny his ability to shoot is special. And he's also pretty unremarkable in a lot of other ways as a prospect. I haven't seen enough in my mind to say, yeah, he absolutely should be, going top 10 and they're stupid for letting him fall, because I think you're right. Like, there's going to be warts to his game and he's not going to be a standout professionally if he makes it in a lot of different areas where you're going to plug him on the top line and put him in all scenarios and a ton of minutes. But you're going to want a guy who can fire one home on the power play. So a Cole Eiserman that lands and can actually shoot at that level in the NHL, that is worth something. So then it gets you thinking, what do you prefer? A Cole Eiserman type who is going to be maybe a liability in other ways or invisible in the neutral zone, but on the power play, an absolute force to be reckoned with when he's hot? Or do you want a guy whose high-end offensive potential isn't as high as Cole Eiserman's, but it's still there, but he plays 200 feet? And what's going to have more of an impact on the game? And what matters more to your organization? And what do you already have? And who could he complement and play with? I don't think there's a perfect answer to that.
I don't think there is an answer to that, because you can ask everybody in the hockey world and nobody's going to have the same opinion. But where I land on that topic is you fill your team with Dylan Larkins and Marco Kaspers and Nate Danielsons and JT Compher and Andrew Kops, so you can fit in a DeBrincat in there. So you can fit in a Cole Eiserman and not have to worry about it.
You draft Cole Eiserman, he's automatically your top left-wing prospect. The second that those words leave Steve Yzerman's mouth, he fills a direct position of need, not only on the depth chart, but also in the goal-scoring department. Like you guys said, you add the supporting cast around him and figure out his deployment, and you could have a perennial 35, 45 goal scorer on your hands. And you can't just pick one of those guys off the tree. You've got to draft them when you get the opportunity.
Like, put it this way. The Red Wings' first line of Raymond, Larkin, DeBrincat. Are we really worried about that line in any way?
If DeBrincat has his cold stretches keep lasting like they did last year, maybe. But to answer your question, no.
You throw him out last minute in a tie game. You worried?
No.
Okay, well, DeBrincat's useless defensively, but he scores goals. You have Raymond and Larkin out there, two really good 200 feet players that you know are going to at least make up for what he lacks. So if you're throwing out on your second line in 3 years, Nate Danielson, JT Compher, and Cole Eiserman, are you going to be that worried? I'm not. And again, there's a question. Is Cole Eiserman worth the 15th overall pick if he's scoring 25 goals a year? Yeah, probably, but maybe not with how deficient he is in other areas. If he's scoring 40 goals a year, is he worth the 15th overall pick? Oh my God, yeah. It doesn't even matter how bad the rest of his game is at that point.
Once upon a time, Phil Kessel is drafted inside the top 10. So, Cole Eiserman could be worth the weight in gold at 15 if he hits.
Phil Kessel's being held out of the league right now because they know if they put him in, he would just break the game and win the Hart every year. So
hey, he got robbed of a Conn Smythe in 2017. So say what you will about those types of players in the playoffs, but Phil proved you can do it.
Phil the Thrill. Okay, we talked about him very recently, so we won't go into a full profile again, but Trevor Connelly is, I think, right up there. And again, the caveat here is, what does your amateur scouting team think of the person? And if they cleared him, he will go high. And if he's on their do not draft list, which is Connelly's on some teams do not draft lists, then it's not even going to be an option. But Connelly, high end talent, fits the bill.
If he is there at 15, he is the most talented player available at 15, full stop. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily saying the Red Wings should or will draft him, but that's going to be the reality. So do with that information what you will.
Okay. We are going to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching a hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for the Red Wings, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer and great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. All right. We talked about him a while ago. He is the most popular player mocked to the Red Wings. He is a pretty complete player, and I honestly believe, and I think we all were talking about this pre-show, he's not going to be there for Detroit because he's such a good player. Michael Brandsegg-Nygard is probably going to be gone, but a really popular, fits the mold of what Eiserman looks for player. Where are you at on him?
You think he's probably going to be gone? Then why is he the Red Wings pick in almost every single mock draft I have seen so far?
Because no one has any imagination. No one has any imagination. That's why.
And here's my concern. Let me start by saying this. I really, really like Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, and I am perfectly happy with this pick. But if the Red Wings pick him, I am concerned. Because if Steve Yzerman is so married to a type that everybody on the face of the earth can predict him to the Red Wings, and then it happens, man, all those jokes we've been making about Steve Yzerman has a type over the years is fully justified, and you will never get us off our bullshit because it's true, it's real. Because MBN is an Yzerman type to a T. 200-foot winger, size, fast, wicked shot, attention to detail, competes his ass off. He's everything you want in a player. I don't love his playmaking. I think he's got more limited offensive upside than some of the players that are going to be in this range, but I also think he has a more complete 200-foot game than most of the players in this range. But yeah, there's not a lot to dislike about his game. I do have serious questions about his mediocre production in the Allsvenskan. As a late birthday, he's a 2005, which is, to me, very much worth noting, in combination with that mediocre production in the Allsvenskan. Now, that is a pro league, but it's not the SHL. Could that be because he's playing with weaker talent around him, so he doesn't get quite the opportunities as a shooter? Maybe he would have done better in the SHL with guys who can get him the puck better. I don't know. That's up for the debate. The eye test is great on him, and I love the prospect. But I don't know. I get legitimately worried. Most of Yzerman's mistakes as a GM have come because he's so married to this type. And to me, there's just, spoiler, he's number 16 on my rankings, so there's no reality where he's my best available, but he's right there. So how could you be mad if he's the pick?
The thing about Yzerman's type, and that's where most of the mistakes have come, the only thing I'll push back on that is, it's like, yes, true, but that's been not exactly in the draft. That hasn't been the biggest space where that has taken place. I will also go further to say, yeah, MBN fits the type, but I think the shot makes him a way more fascinating player within that mold. I think it's really easy to say, yes, he's going to fit in the box of Casper and whoever else. I think the shot does make him really notable. And I think when you go back to what I was talking about, with the Cole Eiserman conversation of how can a player affect all 200 feet of the ice and what can he do as a pro, MBN is, I think, a really good outcome any given year for 15th overall. And I don't actually disagree with you, Brad, in terms of I don't like his offensive upside. Compared to other players who may be there is the big part of the statement that shoulders so much of that. Because if all of those players that we talked about with high-end offensive upside are off the board, and let's say Hage, who I know you really like, is off the board too, then you can do so much worse than MBN. I really like the player overall. I think he's high up on my list of preferred picks, and it's not really about him, and it's not really about pick 15. It just depends on really how the board falls and what you think the Red Wings should take in terms of really special in one dimension, which is the offensive zone, because, spoiler, we think the Red Wings have a high need for skill, and as Evan said before, they don't really have high-end offense, really, really high-end offense in the pipeline, or not a lot of it. But he could be a really great pro.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys said, and scratched off the bingo card. It all depends on how the draft board shakes out. There's nothing wrong with MBN as a prospect. There's nothing wrong with the Red Wings picking him. I just, from my personal perspective, I would prefer that they start swinging on guys like a Cole Eiserman type who have the potential to be ultimate game breakers at the NHL level.
Yeah, because my thing with MBN is, what's his true upside here?
Middle six scoring winger.
I think a second line right winger who's putting up, 30, 25. I think that's his highest upside. But
it's almost a 60-point second line winger is a phenomenal outcome for this 50
But that's
overall.
Best case scenario. There are guys in this range who I could see as flirting with a point per game at some point in their career, albeit with bigger warts in their game and more risk attached to them. I acknowledge that.
Okay.
But I think the Red Wings are at the point where they need to take that swing. And that's my only criticism, not of Brandsegg-Nygard, but just if they do end up picking him. That would be my only criticism of it.
Love it. It was Max Bultman who said Ryan Leonard, maybe not with as much natural offensive ability, but you love the way Ryan Leonard plays a game.
Yeah, 100%.
And I understand. I fully get it's a complicated space to be in at pick 15. I think if Detroit was even 5 picks further back and you knew for a fact these players with a more dynamic attributes were likely to be off the board, then you're doing backflips or you're sprinting to the stage for MBN. So to me, he's not I'm mad at him pick at all. He's far from it. But even if you're lower on Brandsegg-Nygard, which let's say you two are, I don't think either of you are mad at the pick. No,
absolutely not. If he's in the prospect pipeline as of Friday, I'm thrilled. He's immediately the top winger in the system. Full stop, right? He's that good.
Okay, let's make this fun then. Michael Hage.
Exactly what the Red Wings are missing.
Talk about Michael Hage. And spoiler, that's Brad's favorite of the likely guys.
Yeah, he's he can fly. The Red Wings are a slow team. Let's get that out of the way. In the system, on the team, there is not a lot of, we'll call upper tier skaters outside of Larkin and Danielson. Like it's a huge sore spot. And Hage is listed as one of the best skaters in the draft. And you hear that, and sometimes you go, uh-oh, Darren Helm. We don't want to pick Darren Helm in the first round. I know some of you would.
Shout out.
He's also one of the most gifted and creative offensive zone players in the draft. He's got wicked hands, great vision, and a shot that is definitely not going to leave you wanting. He has consistency issues, but the questions arise. Is that because he missed most of his previous season because of a bad shoulder injury? Is that because he lost his father in last offseason and had a really slow start to the year? Many will argue he's the best player in the USHL the second half of the year, which includes Trevor Connelly and players on the NTDP. The upside on him is significant. I would not be surprised if one day he's an 80-point player in the NHL. I also wouldn't be surprised if he's a third-line winger who puts up 35 to 40 points. Like, it's the draft. There's ranges of outcomes. So I'm not sitting here and saying, oh, how can you pass up on Michael Hage? He's a surefire point-per-game player. I understand that's not the most likely scenario for him. But where the Red Wings are at in their system, where they're at in their rebuild, and what they're lacking, not even positionally, but just in terms of skill, this is what they're lacking. Danielson doesn't fit this bill. Kasper doesn't. Mazur doesn't. They don't have that guy who can create quote-unquote easy offense with their talent. And again, I understand all the criticisms of him, and you can make your own case as to why that happened and why that's there, but you can't deny the upside.
Michael Hage is in that top tier with MBN in my mind of if you're not going to be getting someone who fell or you traded up for like a Catton, Teague, whoever, I am very, very, very happy if they take him. You also combine everything Brad said with the fact that the USHL has produced a lot of players who are previously underappreciated. And Brad's right. He didn't start well to the season, but there's a lot that goes into that. And it's not popular to look at off-ice issues, but losing your father as a kid, yeah, you're going to attribute that to some of being thrown off at, the most important formative years of your life as trying to become a pro. If Hage hits, which is doing a lot of lifting in the statement, he answers a ton of needs for the Red Wings system. He's not the only player who can do that. I think in a different way, again, MBN can do that. I think, Liam Greentree, for example, could do that. And those are all different. Cole Eiserman. And those are 4 different flavors of it would still make a big impact in Detroit's offensive abilities moving forward in the pipeline. But Michael Hage is a really fascinating one. And, the Michigan connection there and having him be able to develop there, and they have a close eye on him. That's a really attractive opportunity for the Red Wings.
Doesn't this feel like the year where we're going to spend hours and hours talking about Turcotte and Zegras and Podkolzin just for them to pick a defenseman that was rated way lower on the board? Doesn't it feel like we're walking right into that?
As long as that defenseman ends up being Mo Seider again, I am thrilled with that, Brad. I know better than to say...
What are your thoughts on Stan Solberg?
Because he's who we're talking about next.
Yeah, Michael Hage, like you guys said, he would increase the overall team foot speed exponentially. He would offer a dynamic this team sorely lacks. He is in my list of guys that I'm hoping Detroit drafts at 15.
And also, it's worth mentioning that... Ryan, question for you. Where is Michael Hage playing hockey next season?
Michigan, yeah. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, that would be really convenient to develop a prospect with a lot of talent that needs refining.
Mind you, it's not like, he's down the street and so we're going to draft him, but you're pretty comfortable with being able to monitor his development. And yeah, it's not a project pick. He's a top-end pick in the first round of the NHL draft, but you're pretty happy with being able to... It's either there or Sweden. Those are the 2 best places for Red Wings prospects to be.
We need them in Michigan or quite literally at Nicholas Lindstrom's doorstep.
He'll split weekends with Nick Cronwall.
Soon we'll evolve to the point we only draft defensemen out of Sweden and we only draft forwards if they're playing in Michigan.
Sign me up. You can make a great NHL team with that.
They're trying. Look at their system. They're trying.
We haven't talked about this guy, And there's been noise of he could be a Red Wings type pick. Stian Solberg. How do you feel?
I love the player a lot. This is the one where I really get conflicted because he's a left defenseman, which is absolutely number one on the positions of the Red Wings don't need any more. Now, he's an upgrade on a lot of the guys in the system that we're referencing. He's huge, skates well, mean, competitive, but there's enough offense there to justify it at 15th overall for sure. Mind you, that will not be his calling card in the NHL. You know, he is a poor man's Mo Seider. That is his comparison. The playing in a small country, you know, but played really well, had a huge world championship. His story is very similar to that of how Mo Seider got drafted. The only reason I don't think I focused on him so much for the Red Wings is A, because they don't need another left defenseman. They have a million of them. And B, I don't think he's getting to 15.
No, I don't
I'd
think
be
so
unless one of the top 6 defensemen fell, I am shocked if the Sharks don't go D at 14. And he'd probably be the most likely.
Okay, why don't we read out your rankings, Brad? And then we'll talk about some guys who we didn't mention but are worth mentioning here before we get into, you know, what the rest of the first round type players might be, and then all the other topics beyond that.
All right. Number 1, Macklin Celebrini. Not overthinking that. Number 2, Ivan Demidov. Shocking. Brad goes for the high skill forward at number 2 over any of the defensemen. Sue me. Number 3, Zeev Buium. Again, I told you guys I was really high on him. Number 4, Artyom Levshunov. 5, Berkly Catton. 6, Cayden Lindstrom. 7, Anton Silayev. 8, Zayne Parekh. 9, Beckett Sennecke. 10, Hage. 11, Sam Dickinson. 12, Carter Yakemchuk. Now getting into the realistic range, which will give you an idea of where my preferences lie. 13, Cole Eiserman. 14, Konsta Helenius. 15, Michael Hage. 16, Michael Brandsegg-Nygard. 17, this is where I take the risk on Trevor Connelly. 18, Stian Solberg. 19, Jet Luchenko. 20, Adam Jiricek.
Okay, so Luchenko and Jiricek are 2 of the names that we didn't discuss in detail. Now, Liam Greensheet is there as well. Thoughts on those players in that order?
So Luchenko, I love this guy. I love his creativity. I love his compete. I love that he's a centerman who, again, I've referenced can put him in any situation. He's not big, and I question the ultimate upside, but it's just good enough that I think you can justify it at 15. Obviously, he's 19 on my board, so there will be players on my board that I would prefer over him if they do pick him, but it's at least, we'll call it justifiable. Jiricek, I mean, if you like his brother, you're going to like him. I don't think he has that kind of upside, but he missed almost the entire year with an injury. I just don't know with this guy. What we saw was great. We saw the right-handed defenseman, defends well, good offense, but didn't get enough of a sample, at least for me, to get a real feel for what his upside is. And Greentree, again, I just have questions about the pace. That's really all it comes down to, because we know he's huge and skilled, but I've seen players like that before. Without the pace, it doesn't translate. But again, justifiable.
You can talk me into Greentree. I think he's not at the top of my list of I'd be happy if Detroit took him at 15th overall. But if in Detroit's opinion they thought he's the kind of guy with that skill and size could make it, because I don't think it's a Rasmussen clone. I know that joke is thrown around a lot for good reason. I don't think it's the exact same profile. He's not using colossal height to do these things. He's genuinely very, very skilled. He could be fascinating in my mind.
He plays out of Windsor, so their viewing should be high. And if they pick him, that would mean they saw something they really, really liked.
So that is that's a lot of time dedicated to a lot of prospects, and we talked about which ones are likely to be in Detroit's range. It's also worth stipulating that is not an exhaustive list. Detroit could go, I don't even want to call it off the board, because we didn't talk about guys who are very much worth talking about, like Sasha Boisvert out of Muskegon, EJ Emery, Igor Chernyshov. There's a ton of players up and down the board that you can't even call it a reach. When you get into pick 15 range, you're not talking pick 4 when Detroit was drafting Lucas Raymond kind of thing. And there's a lot of variability when you get to that spot of the NHL draft. And you never know. Someone could fall, and it renders all of this moot. let's get into acknowledging the fact that we haven't talked about everyone. Let's get into our preferences and our predictions. So you're not allowed to say like a Berkly Catton or Iginla or Demidov.
Cayden Lindstrom.
Or Cayden Lindstrom.
Macklin Celebrini.
That one's actually okay. That's a loophole. Brad just found it. So there you go, Steve Yzerman. But within the realm of possibility, who are your preferred players? Let's say top 3. And if you want to go more, you can go more. In order. You have to pick an order. You can have exactly one tie because I know you want it, Evan. I can see it on your face.
One tie, eh? I don't think I'm going to be very original in what I'm about to say because I think we've talked at length about all of these guys. I think for me, barring nothing crazy happening in front of the Red Wings at the draft, I would say for me, Michael Hage is probably my number 1, followed by Trevor Connelly and then Michael Brandsegg-Nygard. Clearly, I am the person who's going on potential here, swinging for the fences, and then my last pick is more of the safe, high floor guy. Ultimately, I think given how sort of the top 15 is looking in this draft based on mocks and consolidated rankings, I think my number 1 pick is anyone who falls at this point.
Yeah.
Because I think there will be somebody there that falls that the Red Wings likely didn't think they had a chance of grabbing.
Yeah, same answer. Anybody who falls. My answer is really whoever the Red Wings think is going to put up the most offense out of who's available to them. Warts be damned. This is a team that struggles to score, has struggled to score forever, and when you look at what's coming through the pipeline, is going to continue to struggle to score. I don't think Eiserman's going to be there when they're picking. I don't think Helenius is going to be there when they're picking. It'd be great if they are, but beyond that, I would go Hage, Nygard, and then, at that point, you probably have to risk it on Connelly.
My list it's dictated by what happens with Connelly. So if in the scouting team and the management team and Eiserman and Draper's and everyone's opinion, they think Connelly will turn into a pro and he's not on their do not draft list, Connelly's at the top of the board. I think it's that simple because we talked about it with the amount of talent available. I think that's what it would take a Catton, a Sennecke, a Iginla to fall to trump Connelly at that point in my mind. So that is a big asterisk. If you want a non-Connelly list beyond him, I think I'm right now having to order myself at Helenius. Hage and MBN is going to be my tie. Eiserman. And then I'm still fascinated by Greentree beyond that, but then you get into Greentree, Solberg. There's a ton of guys who can fit in there, but that's generally my thinking at that point. Preference is to go wild, trade up, get someone, or someone falls out of there that, again, you're both exactly right. It would throw all of it out of off the table, and for really good reason.
Yeah, anybody in my top 12, if they somehow get to sprint to the stage, what are you doing?
Okay, let's get into Lobstradamus mode. Predictions. Who is going to be the 15th overall pick for the Detroit Red Wings? Unless you pick a trade, forward or backward, what's your ultimate prediction?
My actual prediction, Konsta Helenius, because we talked about it pre-episode. My hot take is I think Nygard goes 11 to Buffalo. Otherwise, if Nygard's there at 15, it's the most obvious prediction imaginable.
Once upon a time, I picked a guy who could score a lot of goals, and we never thought he would get to Detroit in Filip Zadina. This time I'm going with Cole Eiserman.
Oh, okay. Wow, I actually feel kind of surprised here that none of us are going to say MBN, but I actually think you're right, Brad. I think he's too attractive of an overall player, and I think he's going to go before. I think the talent is going to be off the board by the time you get to Detroit, and this is just a guess. I have no information to know how they feel about the player with any certainty, but I'll say Trevor Connelly. Those are very varying predictions. I'm surprised.
Those are hot, even for us.
Yeah.
Well, for everybody who's wondering, yes, we did coordinate it so that none of us would pick MBN because we know you're all sick of it. And
we can't coordinate anything. Evan and I showed up to the golf course the other day, Brad, wearing the exact same outfit top to bottom.
Oh, my God.
We can't coordinate anything. Anyhow, go on.
But yeah, no, I think he's going to be an appealing prospect to teams ahead of the Red Wings, and I just don't think he's going to be there. Otherwise, yeah, he's the obvious prediction.
The thought was brought up by others, and I don't want to name them in case they don't want their name attached to this. We'll ask them later, but Stein Solberg might be the, outside of the players we like and getting into who the organization might like, he might be the most Red Wings pick outside of the players we talked about as being more likely.
Picking a defenseman on the side we don't really need when a lot of offensive talent is on the board does feel like a little too on the meme.
Feels Red Wingsy. Okay, trade opportunities. We talked about New Jersey. We talked about Buffalo. Those are 10 and 11 aren't the only picks that could be open, but what trade opportunities would you go for? And I think the bigger question is what's most realistic and how much are you willing to move up?
I would be willing to move a lot to get up for Berkly Catton if he gets out of the top 10. And I think he's the only one that's reasonable you can expect that from, of the guys that I would say you have to go get him, because I don't think Sennecke's getting low enough. I don't think Hage is getting past Calgary. I don't think the Red Wings have a need to give up extra assets to go up for a defenseman unless something crazy like Zeev gets out of the top 10, which isn't happening. So I would say if Catton's sitting there 10, 11, 12, 13, I'm willing to give up probably, couple picks and a prospect, like a decent prospect, to go up and get him.
I'm willing to mortgage not all your futures, but a good amount for, like you said, those high-end guys in a world where I think this likelihood is in the single-digit percentage points right now, but Demidov is falling. I'm willing to move a lot for Demidov.
I don't think anybody would be willing to trade down far enough, but if he gets to 8, 9, 10, yeah, you're giving up the farm to go up and get him.
I'm trading you and Evan. I hope Ivan's good in front of a mic. Like, you do what that's the kind of player where you never sniff that kind of talent outside of the top 5. Really,
I'd be
15.
Even Russian factor aside, I'd be shocked if he gets out of the top 5.
I don't think so either. But there's a lot of good argument to say there's going to be a ton of talent available, so don't mortgage futures. And I think that's actually still probably the sensible opinion here. I don't feel sensible right now, so I still say if you can move up 5 spots and there is someone with high-end talent on the board, and it's not, like that they just went outside of that range, I'm overpaying.
It's going to be really hard for the Red Wings to move up because we've already talked about New Jersey and Buffalo probably not wanting to be willing trade partners at this point, and where both teams are at in their rebuild or on their trajectory. Then you're looking to get into the top 10. It's like Calgary doesn't want to trade down. They are going to try and get Iginla hell or high water. And then you look at, okay, the Kraken, would they want to move down basically 7 spots? Like, what is that going to cost? So then you look on the other side. Oh, does Philly want to move back 2 spots? Does Minnesota want to move back a spot? Is it juice even really worth the squeeze moving up 1 or 2 spots in the draft? Do you believe that those players will still be available at 15? It's going to be very difficult for Detroit to make a move.
What do you guys think about Rutger McGroarty? Because it was reported that he is on the outs with Winnipeg. He saw what happened, with other high-end prospects there. He sees how hard it is to break into that system, and this is yet another player who seems to be dictating his path of where he goes in the NHL. Rutger McGroarty's probably going to be traded pretty soon here. Do you try to move anything, including the 15th pick, for him?
I'd be willing to move a lot to try to get him, but not the 15th pick.
You stop short of that?
I think there will be better players available at 15. I can, based on my list, I can guarantee there's going to be, at least in my opinion, better players available than him.
Perfetti, now McGroarty, we're talking about players you didn't get in the past, but you would have liked on the Red Wings, and they're suddenly available in trade. It's a tough scene for Winnipeg, and they're going to have to do some soul searching inward because you can't change what Winnipeg is as a city, and you can't change a lot of things about that organization, but you can change how you handle your prospects. And as they have a lot more agency and willingness to exercise that, they can't keep getting burned like this. Okay. Trade opportunities. Trade back in your mind? Is anything...
Depends how the board falls.
I think
there'd have to be a couple reaches ahead of them for defensemen. Like if Solberg and Jiricek get picked ahead of them, and then you're sitting there at 15 with MBN and Hage and Helenius.
That's what I was thinking too.
Sure, then you can go back a few spots. Chicago seems pretty hot to trot to move up and get they're eyeballing something after that trade with the Islanders. Sure, but to me, the drop off in this draft is around pick 17, so you'd have to have someone fall.
The obvious stipulation being if someone really, really wants to overpay for 15th and you move back to 21st, which makes you a bit squeamish, but they're handing you over a lot in terms of other picks or prospects, and yeah, sure.
Sure. Where's Winnipeg picking?
Yeah. Okay. Second round picks or other players, because the Red Wings have 15th overall, but they also have a pick in the second round, a pick in the third round, Dallas's pick in the fourth round, a fifth round pick, a sixth round pick, and their own pick in the seventh round, as well as New Jersey's. So not the most pick rich draft we've seen compared to a rebuilding team, but Detroit does have a pick in each round at least. So second round picks and beyond. What are some of the names that jump out at you? And I'll start by saying, Evan and you talked about Andrew Basha. I don't know if he's likely to be there, but if he's the kind of player that falls, that's a lot of offensive ability that could potentially be there. We named other player like Brad. You talked about Jet Luchenko. Could he be available there?
No chance he's getting that far.
Alphonse Frey.
Would love
That's
that.
That's a great
pick.
name.
That's a fantastic name.
I would love Frey. I would love it if Teddy Stiga fell that far. He's probably actually a good candidate if he gets into the second round, like maybe trying to jump up 5-10 spots. I know you're big on John Mustard. I like him as well. Sam O'Reilly, although he's starting to get a lot of love, so he might even go in the first round now.
What would you like to have a 100-point player in the WHL, but they can't?
Are you going to say Parekh?
Yes.
Yes.
They can't skate.
With a second round pick, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. He had, in 68 games, he had 43 goals, 62 assists for 105 points.
Yeah, like
his downside is he is awful in transition. He cannot skate, but he is a absolute clinical finisher on and off the puck.
Can I interest you in a Tanner Howe if you're on that front?
You know where I sit in the philosophy of this draft.
Yeah, so I'm at the same point as you. In the second round, I don't care defenseman or forward. I genuinely don't. What I want is I want the Red Wings to swing for upside. You're going to miss on 80 to 90% of them outside of the first round. But all you need to hit on is one, and you get an upper, tier, top of the lineup type player. So I don't care who you pick. Again, I have my list: Stiga, Mustard, Parekh, Howe, Frey, Aaron Kiviharju if he goes that low. Swing for the upside. I understand the odds of these guys hitting in the middle of the second round is low. Before anybody comes at me, I understand. But if they hit, they are not playing on your fourth line, moonlighting on the penalty kill and playing 12 minutes a game. They are on your power play, giving you points, and again, upside doesn't have to be points. If you're looking at a defenseman going, that guy, like if an EJ Emery gets into the second round, yeah, we understand the hockey IQ might be an issue, but the dude's an elite athlete, can move. There is a potential top pairing supporting defender there. Likely? No, but you can see the path to get there. Whereas with a lot of these guys that they've picked in the past, there is no path to be that upper tier player. Again, and it's worth repeating, fourth liners, third liners, and bottom pair D, you can get 1 million of them every offseason on 1-year deals for next to no money. Do not waste draft assets on that.
A name that I want to add because I actually think this could be right up of the what the Red Wings would do, Lucas Pettersson. They would have a lot of looks at him, obviously being in Sweden, and we know about Håkan Andersson and his looks there. I think really good offensive potential. Plays center, potentially sticks at center, but otherwise could be a pretty decent forward prospect for them. He's a name that jumps out at me. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be at the second round, but jumps out in my mind.
That's Moto, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not for Lunda or Rogla, so we're not interested.
But he's a name that also jumped out to me. we could talk all day about what Brad just said and even more second round names. The very simple answer is, who do you want in the second round? Who fell out of the first round?
Yeah.
There's a world, and I wouldn't bet on it, but there's a world where a green tree type could fall out of the first round, right?
Remember when Logan Stankoven fell to the late 40s?
He's not the only one.
I do.
Brock Faber.
Yeah. How did they get that pick? Where did that pick come from?
We're not talking about that, Brad.
Trevor Connelly
Trevor Connelly could be the answer there.
Could be the guy there. Like, let's not. I know everyone is enamored with his potential skill at the NHL level, but there are opportunities or potential for him to fall out of the first round.
If Trevor Connelly's not picked after pick 32, that is all the conversation across the board overnight leading into day 2 of the draft.
Yeah.
Okay. The NHL draft, we have a live stream Friday. We're going to start an hour before the draft. We are going to be doing analysis, more prep conversation. We're going to be reacting live to all the picks, the Red Wings pick, the blockbuster trade that's going to be made, of course, all of that and lots more. YouTube.
So we're starting our draft stream when the draft's supposed to start, because it typically takes like an hour for them to actually do the first pick.
Well, it's at the Sphere, and there's going to be all this fanfare about how they're at the Sphere, and we're going to drink every time they say Sphere, and then we might make it to pick 4 before
we're allowed to
pass
drink.
I can't wait to watch the San Jose Sharks logo float around the outside of the Sphere for an hour and a half before they pick Macklin Celebrini.
They just changed the Windows 95 screensaver to the logos.
Amazing. I love it. Okay, we have the draft. Look at this episode. Look how long we talked about our draft preview. We also have the live stream coming up. We have the day 2 live stream for patrons, which is a live hangout where we cover rounds 2 through 7 for our Patreon supporters. We have, the mock draft coming up next episode. Draft. Yeah, 2 seconds after that is free agency and trades. So it's a lot coming in, which is really great, as we talked about, but is it coming hot and heavy? So shout out to Sean Shapiro, and actually Max Altman of the Athletic Detroit also hammered out some articles right away on it. But the Steve Yzerman press conference happened yesterday and had some interesting tidbits in there. So I'll link to the Shap Shots article to summarize this. But the topic of conversations for most people was the Seider and Raymond deals were perceived to be not likely to happen before July 1st by Steve Yzerman. So any thoughts on that to start?
I don't love it, because that's the most important part of this offseason outside of the draft. The optimistic view, though, is they probably have a very good idea of range. They have a rough idea of where they're going to sit for contracts. So if Eiserman doesn't have a good idea of how much space he needs to save at this point, it's odd, would be the polite way to put it. And also, if he leaves the max available for each of the guys and the agents know, you're planning on paying up, so we're going to play hardball. But I don't know. I would have preferred it to be done before free agency, but it is what it is.
Very obvious qualifier here. Eiserman is not exactly the most transparent guy in the league, and is kind of a safe in terms of it's Fort Knox in there. And sometimes he says things just because he feels like saying them and he doesn't mind sharing. And sometimes he says things because he's calculated. And is that exactly the truth? I think he'd be a fool to say it's 100% the truth every time. And sometimes he just flat out says, I'm not telling you that. In negotiations, it's a negotiation when you're at the table. It's a negotiation when you're not talking. It's a negotiation when either party is talking to the media. And so keep all that in mind. What I will say is, yep, Brad's right. It would be nice to have this sorted before July 1st. Not the end of the world, but it still would be preferred. I think we're very heavily into the territory of you have to be looking at what potential shorter term options are here in terms of what the fan base should expect. And I don't mean because that's necessarily what Eiserman or the Red Wings want. I'm saying if it's taking this long, this isn't an easy negotiation. And there's disparity in terms of term, I would bet is the most important thing here, because the players and their agents will be looking at the NHL salary cap going up, not just next year and not just the year after that, but even beyond that. And they'll say, I don't want to cash in on an 8-year deal now. I want to set myself up in a few years when I think I'll be better and there's more money on the table. So I'm not going to say it's a good thing, not the end of the world, but I think this is, as expected, pretty complicated.
Would it be too extreme to say if this ends up in 2 bridge deals, it's a failure?
Yeah, I think that's too extreme.
But it's close, right?
What is fit? No,
Because we know bridge versus no bridge, the advantages, right? If you go max term or long term now, it's a cheaper AAV than what you're going to pay them in 2 or 3 years, which we've went over is the window of time we care about.
But what if the players don't want it? The better question is, why would the players want it? Can you think of a single reason why?
No, I agree with you that if I'm these players, I absolutely want a bridge and then pay and then max out later. But at the same time, it's the team's job to negotiate this, right? And
yeah.
What's the saying from Star Trek? You can do nothing wrong and still lose.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if it ends up in 2 bridge deals, it's a loss. Is the polite way of putting it.
I think if it's 2 bridge deals, it's not the perfect outcome. Is the most I can say. You just have to see the terms of the deal, right?
But I don't even care. But that's the thing. If they're 2 or 3 year bridge deals, I almost genuinely don't care what the AAV is. Obviously, I do, but very little because I don't think the Red Wings are winning a Stanley Cup in the next 3 years. So those are not the years where the salary cap really, truly matters to me if I'm the GM. Because I want maximum cap flexibility and maximum cap space when I think the core of this team is ready to win a Stanley Cup. And if you are giving each of them $2 extra million a year because those are contracts signed coming out of a bridge, that's a big loss. That's $4 million. Imagine at the trade deadline what $4 million could get you if you're a cup contender. A hell of a lot.
There's a lot stands to reason, though. If you go on a shorter deal and then that AAV is not as high, then in those years you have an opportunity to sign a long-term contract with the player who's available later. That short-term cap flexibility could still be of value. I don't like the concept that you only have to look within the realm of those 2 players, because saving cap flexibility within the next 3 years or 4 years or whatever it is, even though the Red Wings in all likelihood aren't going to be a cup contender, there is still utility to that cap flexibility at that time, looking beyond that time frame.
Oh, I agree with you. I'm not saying there's no upside. There's a lot of advantages to bridge deals here, but I'm saying they do not outweigh the negatives in this scenario.
The preference is definitely 8 years.
Yes.
I really like
both of them.
That Star Trek quote is a very, very good way to put it. Free agents. Patrick Kane is the topic du jour for, not Seider and Raymond. And, there's noise on Kane. And I think those conversations are happening. And I think term is still the really big sticking point here. Obviously, the AAV, has to be decided or whatever you think that order is going to go. But I think Kane's looking for 3 years or more here. And I just don't know that Eiserman wants that. I think there's maybe some squeamishness even beyond 1 more year from the Red Wings. I have to imagine Kane's going to, I don't think he's out of it with Detroit, but I think it's going to market and just seeing what's out there. With the moves New York's making and the fact that Kane wanted to go there and what that team needs, I'd be surprised if that wasn't another connection that's going to be revisited too. So Detroit's not out of it, but if another team's willing to give 3 years, that might put them out of it.
So the Red Wings are going to then have to go into the free agency pool and try and find a guy who could be a half point per game to a point per game player and not spend more than what they would on Patrick Kane.
Doesn't exist.
That is my entire point.
Has to is a phrase, but I think that's getting into our free agency episode. But you're losing a lot of offense in the most generous interpretation.
You're losing a lot of dollars, period. Like, you're losing a lot of marketing dollars. You're losing, primetime viewership dollars. You're losing jersey sales. You are losing a conduit to attract future free agents by not signing Patrick Kane.
If you don't re-sign Patrick Kane, I think the alternative is then you have to be aggressive in the trade market, because I don't love the free agency market for replacing him, but I do like some trade options to replace him.
I think there's a couple free agents that I'd be pretty interested in. They're not Kane clones, but those don't exist.
But we also know how free agency contracts go, and are you willing to overpay in AAV and term to get your consolation prize?
I'm seeing big numbers being thrown for Marchessault, and I'm just not really interested in that.
More news. Dylan Larkin had an upper body injury and had it operated on after the season. He's going to be ready to go for training camp, as will Alex Lyon, who had a cut on his hand at the World. So he's okay, and he'll also be fine for training camp. And then there's conversation about goaltending. And I also think this deserves the big asterisk of what you hear from Yzerman's mouth might not be directed at the media. It could be negotiation, or it could just be smoke. But Yzerman doesn't envision carrying 3 goalies on the NHL roster next season. It complicates things in a lot of ways for roster. He mentioned practice, etc. The interest in the goalie is there. He all but confirmed that. We've talked about how we think Detroit's around Gibson. There are multiple reports now that Detroit could be around Ullmark. Yzerman had a quote of saying, he doesn't want a goalie around for just a couple of years before they leave. So if you think Yzerman and the Red Wings are around Ullmark, then that would have to come with an extension. Former Vezina winner obviously is not going to be cheap to acquire, but former Vezina winner with an extension could then satisfy Yzerman's taste for a top-level goalie. So where there's smoke, there's fire, and I think there's some fire there. Not guaranteed to happen. I think he's very happy to come back with a line, and so if that's all that's reasonable, but there could be something.
Depends all on so many things, mainly futures here. How many futures are you willing to give up for, let's call it 5 to 6 years of Linus Ullmark? So you're looking at a 4 or a 5-year extension versus what you have to give up for 3 years of a John Gibson. I agree, and nobody in the right mind will sit here and say John Gibson's better than Linus Ullmark. He's not. But he's not going to cost you a lot. Ullmark's going to cost you a lot in terms of futures. We just saw a first-round pick and an okay player go to Calgary for a much older Jacob Markstrom. I think he's 4 or 5 years older, who had a full no move clause, which, by the way, Red Wings might be on Ullmark's list of I ain't going there, so it might be moot.
Yeah, he's got a 16-team no-trade list that flips to a 15-team no-trade list for next season.
God, I love these conditions on some NHL contracts. But either way, he's going to cost you a lot because of those. He's younger. He's better. If you get the extension in there, there's more term. Because let me be clear, I have zero interest in only 1 year of Linus Ullmark.
Yeah, same. I think that's a non-starter. It's coming with an extension or not at all.
Red Wings are still not in a point for a rental. You extend him or not at all, and then it comes with the caveat of, when do you think Konsta or Augustine will be ready? Do you want 8 years of Linus Ullmark just standing there as a roadblock? I think 4 or 5 years is a reasonable, transition period. Konsta, let's say, gets 2 more years in Grand Rapids, comes in and backs up for a year or two, and then as Ullmark's on his way out, they flip-flop, and now Kosta's a starter with Ullmark being the veteran backup. I think there's a lot of logic to that. But any longer than that, and then I'm just wondering, what are you doing with your 2-star goalie prospects at that point? And again, goalie prospects, never a guarantee. At least you get some certainty with Ullmark. Mostly. Goalies are weird.
We're not going to go further into this because I have a feeling we're going to be stealing from future topics, which aren't far down the road. I can't even say that. It's like 2 episodes from now. Yzerman said a lot and not much at all, but I think there is substance there. So it all remains to be seen. Let's jump into the least notable news for this podcast episode, which is the Edmonton Oilers have come back from a 3-0 deficit to force a Game 7 against the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup Final, and maybe could repeat something that hasn't been done in 82 years. This is the biggest game in modern NHL history, and it is like our last topic before overtime. I thought, Edmonton, it wasn't impossible that they could do this, get to Game 7. If you have McDavid, if you have Draisaitl, if you have the players that they have, and if you have McDavid, you can do this. End of story. But it was really, really, really unlikely because 1, it's just hard to do. 2, you have Stuart Skinner in net, and what's he going to be for those elimination games? And 3, you have the Florida Panthers who are a buzzsaw on the ice, and they have a buzzsaw in net effectively with Bobrovsky. Yeah, it's hard to do, but they've made it look almost easy. They have Skinner in net who has looked substantially better than Bobrovsky, and Florida, who I thought even after games 4 and 5, where maybe the moment got to them, they were thoroughly outclassed by and large in Game 6. Not completely, but there was moments there where I was like, you would think they weren't scared of losing based on how much it looks like Edmonton is just dominating the entire ice here. The momentum is completely in Edmonton's favor. Florida has to be horrified right now.
And that was a Game 6 Edmonton dominated with 0 points and 0 shots on goal from Connor McDavid.
Yeah.
And that's got to be Florida's biggest worry. They just got beat, and McDavid might still be a little pissed off going into Game 7.
It's crazy. Like, watching that last game, never really felt like Florida was a real threat to close out the series. Florida, controlled possession for almost all of the game. A Florida forward did not have a shot on net for the first 31 minutes of the game. That is if I'm Paul Maurice, I'm losing my mind. Like, that is unacceptable if you want to be a Stanley Cup champion.
Would it be crazy to say Edmonton's been the better team 5 of 6 games so far in the finals? They got Bobrovski'd twice and then won 3 games.
I don't think you can be called crazy. You might get some argument, but you couldn't be called crazy.
At worst, 4. Like, at worst, they've been the better 4 of the 6 games. So, yeah, if I'm Florida, I'm crazy nervous going into Game 7. They have all the pressure on them. Down Goes Brown did a great article of what historic collapses in hockey history, like, where would this Florida collapse rank? And his solution very quickly was number 1 by a lot. Nobody's close at number 2. And then he expanded it to all 4 major North American sports. Number 1, nobody's close. Like, it's devastating if they blow this. A franchise that has never won a cup, dominated so thoroughly through the regular season and the playoffs. Did Florida ever look in trouble at any point in these playoffs? And then you go up 3-0. They were moonwalking to the Stanley Cup, and all of a sudden, here we're sitting going, okay, Game 7 of the Cup Finals. And they do have home ice advantage. They're still the Florida Panthers, so I'm not saying they're going to get smoked by Edmonton. They're very much, it's probably basically a 50-50. But, man,
I can't believe we've gotten this far into the conversation and haven't talked about the offside review.
I'm so horrified of what's going to happen to my left, and I'll keep my hands below the table. I'll hold them behind my back here. That was it. First of all, that was a killer for Florida. That's got to be devastating.
What, like 10 seconds after Edmonton made it 2-0? Either way, it was super quick and a hell of a way to kill the momentum.
That was as close as you can get to too close to call while still saying on the line of definitive in my mind. It sucks. Was it by a hair? Yes. I think you have to give credit to Edmonton's active sticks during the break-in, because that's what has been scaring Florida forwards and entries to kind of take that extra step at the blue line. You have to consider that, and I don't hear a lot of conversation about that. It was still definitive, and it sucks if you're a Panthers fan, but in my mind, it was like a pixel. Any less than that, and you would have said there's no way they could overturn it, but I think it was the right call.
I think I err on the side of with you that, yeah, I think it was offside, and I don't really feel like getting into an argument on the word definitive, but I think it was.
If we weren't so far, if this wasn't like a literal mega episode, we would have time for this all day. But.
I know. All I'll say is that was a huge moment in the game. Florida killed Edmonton's momentum right as it was peaking, and it had them right back in the game. And then instead, the wave off and the crowd going nuts again killed the momentum and just furthered the momentum for Edmonton. And I've been sitting here since this stupid ass review system came in place and said it's going to happen at a big moment in the Cup Final eventually, and everybody's going to hate it. And here we are.
I don't think this fits that bill. I think 1 pixel less, and this would fit the category you just stated. But I think this is still, people hate it, but you kind of can't deny it.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not arguing that. I'm saying people hate it, and that's the end of my sentence.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and this is an entertainment product and all that. This is one of those goals, like, if this was the old era, we'll call it, nobody's questioning that play.
You know what we're going to do? Off-season content. Evan, you don't even have to be here if you want.
Oh, great.
You can have a ref shirt and a whistle if you'd like, ironically. Brad and I, case of that blue light each. We're not allowed to start debating offside reviews until we're 6. There's 6 bottle tops in front of us, each side, and then we just have it out as long as we want.
Yeah. What would really happen there would you would start with, I'm in favor of offside reviews, and then the episode's over because I would just smash one of the empties over your head.
Okay. Stanley Cup Final, Game 7 predictions. I'll start. It hasn't happened in 82 years. Florida, I would have to think, will figure it out eventually. I don't know. I think Edmonton has all the momentum, and I don't even feel like this is the right thing to say, but I think Florida ekes this out still, just by the skin of their teeth.
Hockey traditionally being a very boring sport in terms of storylines, it feels like that's the path we're going on. But this is where I have to be just an ass about it. What was my prediction before the Cup Finals?
Yeah, I know. You said
Oilers in 7, 3-2 Edmonton, 2 points Connor McDavid. That's my prediction.
You know, it hasn't happened in 82 years. Why should it happen now? I'll pick Florida.
All right.
And there have been so many instances in the NHL where a team came back from 3-0 just to lose in Game 7. Detroit twice. So I understand hockey is not fun this way, and it is in Florida. So my gut's leaning that way, but I have to stick to I said Edmonton in 7 at the beginning of the series. I'm not going off it now.
Okay.
Not how I predicted we would have got here.
No. We're going to jump into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to support the show, you get the bonus episodes, which record right after these main ones. You get the Discord. You get the automatic entry into all of our giveaways. You allow us to produce this content, including mega episodes like this. You also allow us to produce other content like Expected by Whom, hosted by Sean Shapiro and Prashant Iyer. And you also allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation through initiatives like Winged Wheel Podcast Nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Might be an abbreviated one. We apologize, but just for the sake of time, we'll take some here. This comment from Jake Nagy says, after my question on the previous episode about McDavid's 174 points this season being more than Luke Glendening has scored over the course of his entire career, Evan wondered how many players that's true of. I went to Quant Hockey's database, which shows there are roughly 1,000 active skaters in the NHL. Exactly 2 NHL skaters have 174 career points, Miles Wood and Lucas Raymond. Additionally, there are 312 active skaters with more than 174 career points, which means that Connor McDavid has more points than, this season, 69% of active NHLers in their entire career.
Nice.
Jesus. Also, fun McDavid playoff point stat. Connor McDavid is 2 points behind Alexander Barkov in playoff points this year if you added all of Matthew Tkachuk's playoff points to Alexander Barkov. That's insane.
Generational. Justin Bufflin's Shaggin' Wagon says, what's your opinion of Detroit trying to add Dylan DeMello? Sorry, that name's great. Dylan DeMello if Eiserman happens to find an extra $5-ish million to spend on a defenseman instead of potentially going after Roy, Myers, Shea, Tanev, Zadorov, etc., or re-signing Ghost, guy was second best plus-minus in the league last year.
I like Dylan DeMello. I don't like $5 million Dylan DeMello.
An option. Joshua Valance says, out of these 2 potential trade targets for the Red Wings, which would you prefer, Necas or Zegras?
Necas.
I think I like Zegras. I think because for a few reasons. 1, longer runway. 2, lower stock compared to what I think he actually could be. And 3, Anaheim can take salary back. Even though I know Verbeek doesn't prefer to, they as a team can take salary back, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I could see that, but there is the baggage.
Yeah, I'm good with either. Bring them in.
Both.
Bring them both.
Yeah.
Wizard of Osgood says, who's a player ranked in the top 10 that you can reasonably see slipping to 15 that you would want the Wings to take? And name a player ranked in the 20 to 30 range that you would be happy with Steve surprising people and picking at 15. Helenius and Chernyshov are my choices.
Helenius isn't ranked in the top 10.
Some people have him there, but I think he's more in the 10 to 16 range.
I agree. Catton or Yakemchuk, maybe, but we're getting into the extremes there. And outside of the consensus top 20, none. I would be at least a little upset.
No, I'm fine with Greentree, for example.
But even then, he's late teens from what I've seen on most rankings. But yeah, if you classify him as early 20s, okay.
I just don't know who else would. I don't see Sam Dickinson falling just because of the position, honestly.
Yeah, no, I don't think any of the top 6 defensemen are making it that far.
If Catton falls, that'd be insane. All right. why don't we actually wrap this one up? I know that's a very short OT, but we'll answer all the rest in our Patreon exclusive overtime, and we have to get into some other preparatory content. Thank you all so very much for tuning in to the 2024 NHL Draft Preview plus everything else in the NHL happening episode. If you want to support the show and more content like this, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. It really does mean the world to us. And if you want to support the show, but Patreon's not for you, leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Huge help if you do that. Thumbs up on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you get the show and tell a friend. Appreciate Labatt Blue Light sponsoring this episode, as well as, again, all of our listeners, new and old. Can't say thank you enough. And to all of our patrons, this show doesn't happen without you. To our name level supporters on Patreon, thank you. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Brad is Wrong and Plays Like Sprong, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Avery Sloppy Seconds, Carl Bertina Nanaluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton. Everybody looking at their phone right now is a lovely and kind person. Also, I didn't shit on Ryan's lawn. That was someone else. God Creatives, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassam, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Joel Miranda, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pud, S. Klein, Scott Martin, Sid Dutler, Skeletor, Screen Lube, Stoli 70 Wingnut. That's what I appreciate about you. Utah Stormin Mormons, Wellman's Elite Dancing D, Eiserman Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankston, A.A. Ron, A.B., Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, Axel, Sandy Pellica, Bellingham Acid Balls, Chimkim Nuggets, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Chungus Joke, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheeseback Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes, Dirty Deke, D-Bots, Eric Nance, Evans Fourth Putt, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingles, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Michigan Boy Navs Country, O Ophelia, Salt Lake Sugar Girlie, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123. This account brought to you by Bauer. Wow, we got no money for that. Throw the Road Puss, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Next time we talk, there's going to be a Stanley Cup champion.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.